What is up, my dudes, and welcome to today's Photoshop tutorial. So in this video we're going to be going over the Avengers effect. I think the official names for it is along the lines of dispersion or scatter effect, but you guys hopefully know this from the most recent Avengers, where everyone kind of just starts to disintegrate into nothing. If you don't, you really need to go check that film out because it's amazing. So I'm just going to jump straight into the video. There's one thing you're going to need before starting to apply this effect, and it's a certain set of brushes. You can get these from a site called Brush Easy. It's the one I use. You can get them from a bunch of sites, but I use Brush Easy. I've actually made an entire video on how to download and install these brushes, so if you want to go check that out beforehand, then please do. I'll leave a link in the description. It's only like sort of 3 minutes long. But once you've got those brushes, we can kick off with the video itself. So just go ahead and boot your image into Photoshop. And from here, we're going to want to unlock our original background layer. So if we just double click on this, we can now rename this background and hit OK, and that'll unlock it for us. And then we're going to want to create a duplicate just by dragging it onto this page icon down here, and then call this foreground. So as the names would suggest, we're going to separate our background from our foreground. So I'm just going to make my foreground layer invisible by selecting the eye icon, then select my background layer, make sure that that's highlighted, and using the lasso tool, which you can find third from the top, I'm just going to go through and create a really rough selection of our foreground image so that we can remove it. So you'll notice I've highlighted the foreground. I'm just going to right click in that box, hit fill, and make sure my use is set to content aware and that preserve transparency is unticked, and hit OK. And this will kind of begin to sort of Photoshop will do its thing and remove that foreground image for you. Your background may look a little bit more blotchy or smudged than mine. I wouldn't worry too much. Honestly, the selections in this whole process don't have to be amazing because the effect itself allows for a little bit of slack. So now with my keyboard, I'm going to hit Control D, or Command if you're on a Mac. So every time throughout this video you hear me say Control, it's Command on a Mac. I'm going to hit Control D, and that'll deselect that selection for us. And now I'm going to make my foreground visible and make sure that I've got it selected. And I'm going to begin to sort of bring this out from the background now. So I'm going to use my quick selection tool, and I'm just going to make a really, really rough selection of the foreground image. So whatever your foreground image may be. Mine in this case is a bird, and I'm just going to go through and create a really rough selection of the actual image itself. So you'll notice I've spilled over the edges here and I've gone into the background a bit. If I hold Alt on my keyboard, you'll notice the symbol in the middle of my cursor moves to a minus. That then means that I can begin to remove any of that selection that I don't want in there. So you'll notice the selection itself is really, really rough. I'm going to want to refine the edge just a little bit. So once I've made the selection, I'm going to head up to Select and Refine Edge. And then I'm going to use this tool just here to go through and clean the edges up a bit. So I'm going to resize my brush by using the brackets on my keyboard, so the square ones. The square right bracket makes it bigger and the square left bracket makes the brush smaller. And then I'm just going to go through and clean up those edges a little bit. I'm not going to worry too much about how it looks because, as I said, this effect allows for a little bit of leeway in our selection. But I'm just going to make sure that it's not absolutely terrible. So I've cleaned the selection up a bit and I'm happy with that. So now I'm going to want to export it by using the output to even, and I'm going to select layer mask and hit OK. So once we've got our layer mask, we're going to create a duplicate, drag it down onto this little page icon down here. And with this one, we're going to right click on the actual layer itself and then hit apply layer mask. And then we can turn our foreground layer just here off. We're not going to need that for now. So we've got a foreground copy. We're going to want to make an additional copy by again dragging it onto that little icon down there. If you want to use the keyboard shortcut, it's Control or Command J. So I'm going to create this one, and I'm going to call this one dispersion or Avenger, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want the effect to be. And this one here, I'm just going to call figure, so whatever's in the foreground of your image. So now we've got the effect here, which is going to be the dispersion itself, and then the foreground figure. So with my dispersion or my Avenger layer selected, I'm going to head up to Filter and then Liquify. And I'm going to want to begin to drag this image all the way to the edge of the page. When I'm doing this, I want to try and keep as much detail in the image as I can. So I'm going to use my smudge tool initially, and I'm going to go for a big brush, and I'm just going to drag out as much as I can without sort of smirching, that's not even a word, without smudging this too much and without losing too much of the detail. So just use a bigger brush to drag it all out in one sort of lump. and then as you're happy with it, you can begin to sort of use your shrink tool if you need to bring a little bit of detail back. Just use your shrink tool to get some of those feathers back in there. Then I'm going to head back to my smudge tool, make it a little bit smaller, and now I can begin to get a little bit more reckless with the selection as it gets towards the edge of the canvas. So once we're happy with that, again, make my brush a little bit bigger and just begin to drag that all the way out. But otherwise, that should be about it. That's got a little bit rough towards the top there, but that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to drag that out a bit. Okay, perfect. So once you've done that, hit OK, and you'll be left with a really funky looking image. Once we've got this sort of image left in front of us, select our Avenger layer, hold Alt on your keyboard, and don't do what I just done. That was silly. Click and hold this and drag it down whilst holding Alt on your keyboard to a new layer mask, and that'll delete it. So just to go over that again, because I feel like I messed that up a bit. If you click on the Avenger layer and holding Alt, just drag it down onto the layer mask here, and that will get rid of your background. And we've made a layer mask, and we're going to want to do the same to the figure above, but only this time we're not going to hold Alt, so we're just going to drag that down onto the layer mask itself. So now we can begin to paint the effect on with those brushes I spoke about earlier. Just a general rule of thumb when we're doing this, whatever layer mask you're painting on, you paint in the opposite color. So you'll notice this layer mask here, the figure in this is white. So I would paint in black on this layer, and on the one below, the figure in this that we've smudged the edge just here is in black, so I would paint in white. So I'm going to select the foreground. I'm going to begin to use this one. So if I select that layer mask, again, make sure my color is black because the foreground figure is white. I'm going to select my brush tool and select the dispersion brush that I want to use. So in this case, I'm just going to go for this big old beefy one here. And again, using my square brackets, I'm just going to make that a little bit smaller. I'm going to bring out my brush palette here so I can sort of begin to customize the brush as I move along. And I'm going to rotate this and then just begin to erase around the edge of the bird. So this, you'll notice now it's beginning to apply this effect in for us, which is ideal. So I'm going to have to rush this and be a little bit sort of hasty with it, but hopefully you guys take your time. Just go through, rotate your brush, change how it looks, because we don't want this to look too uniform. You know, change the size, rotate your brush, and just get the effect looking as nice as you can. Don't worry too much if it doesn't look amazing to start with, because any sort of changes we make to this can be unmade just by painting in the opposite color. And we're also going to do a little cleanup at the end where we go through and just make this a little bit sharper. So again, you'll notice I'm changing the size of my brushes. I'm going to keep it fairly small for this bit just now, and then we'll begin to change the size of the brush as we move on. But just go through and begin to apply the effect where you can, and don't forget to change the brush that you're using every now and then as well, because we don't, again, want this to look too uniform. If you make any mistakes, so if you go through and you do a bunch of stuff that you don't like, Control Z will undo it once, or Control Alt and Z will let you go back as many times as you need to. So I'm just going to change this brush up a bit, rotate that out, and then begin to apply the effect. So I'm going to leave that there. It looks pretty rough. Please don't judge me. I do have to try and take into account the time this video is going to be running for. So once you've got the effect on your foreground, we're going to want to select the background layer that we've got here, so the smudge, the liquefier that we made. Make sure that we've got a layer selected and flip this out to be white, and then we can go and paint the effect on here. So if I just do this, you'll notice it begins to paint that effect in, but obviously I don't want to go that rough with it, so I'm going to Control Alt and Z that. And I'm just going to rotate my brush out a bit, and again, you can change the dynamic of the brush just by dragging this as well. But I'm going to rotate my brush a bit, make this a little bit smaller, and just go through and, oh, hello, that's not worked. Make sure I've got this layer selected, and just go through and begin to paint the effect in here a little bit. So changing my brush size and how it looks, rotating the brush, again, changing the brush that I'm using, and hopefully you guys are taking your time with this. Just going through and making the effect look as nice as I can. And don't forget to throw a couple of big ones in there, so really just sort of whammy a couple of plus sizes in there. Just make the brush as big as you can and get some decent sized ones in. And just get this effect looking as clean as you can. I didn't like that, that looked rubbish. Control Alt and Z that. Okay, so the selection on this doesn't look amazing. It looks a little bit rough. I'm doing this in sort of a limited time, but I will go through and clean this up a little bit now. So once you're happy with how the effect looks, or you think the scatter looks pretty decent, but it just needs to be cleaned up a bit, what we're going to do is we're going to go through, we're going to grab our brush again, and this time we're going to grab just a normal whitehead round brush, and we're going to drop the hardness on the edge of this down to 0. So we've got a normal circular brush, we've dropped the hardness down to 0. We're just going to change the size on this to up it a little bit. And we're just going to go through and clean up our selection, right? So there's bits in the image just here where I'm highlighting that I don't really want to be there. So I'm going to select the layer mask, make sure that I'm painting in white this time, so white on white, because I want to add back in. And I'm just going to go through and just add a little bit of the edge back in there, because we've erased some stuff that I didn't want erased. And then if I wanted to, I could flip that out to black and do the same to erase some, but I don't want to do that. If I wanted to just sort of take away from the edge a bit, I could also. So I'm going to clean that bit up, and then again I'm going to do the same here. So I'm going to select the layer. This time it'd be black on black for anything that I don't want, and I can just erase it. So if there's bits of sort of shatter in here, like there's too much going on down here, I can erase that. There's a bit too much going on up there. I'm just going to drag this out into a bigger window quick. There's a bit too much going on up here that I don't really like, so we get rid of that. And then we'll erase a bit from there, because again, there's too much going on. Didn't really like that change. Leave that in. Get rid of a bit there. Okay. And then just go through and get that looking as crisp as you can. Until you're happy with the effect. So hopefully, as I said, you guys take your time with that, go through and just really nail it, get that looking as clean as it can. And then we can go and enhance this image just a little bit more. But in terms of the base of the effect itself, you're now done. So you've pretty much nailed it. Mine looks absolutely terrible, but again, it was just a really rough version to try and show you guys. I'll leave a link to a proper image that I've done in the description just to show you how this effect can really look. So the final steps that we're going to want to do to this is merge all our layers down into one. So I'm just going to Control E. Oh, I'm going to apply those changes and Control E all the way down. Again, turn this layer off. So this one I can just get rid of now. Don't even need that. And I can merge that down into the background. So we sort of merge this all into one image. And then from there, I can apply a layer mask to this. A layer mask, a gradient map, sorry. And just sort of hit that to soft light. So if I use my view mode and I'm going to change that down to soft light, just reverse that and drop the opacity a little bit, so that kind of just darkens the image for me. If you like that effect, then apply it. I am a big fan of it. You may not be, but that is the dispersion effect in a nutshell. Hopefully you guys take a bit of time, get that looking amazing, and also just send me the images you've made, man. I'm really intrigued to see what your guys' look like. I'll leave a link in the description to somewhere you can send the image over to. I honestly will look at all of them because I genuinely want to see how well you guys are doing with this. It's nice for me to get feedback and see what you're creating, so that I know whether my videos themselves have been a bit slack or they've actually shown you what they was trying to achieve. So I'll leave a link that you guys can send me your images to. That would be amazing if you could do that. But otherwise, you guys have a great day.